Smoke rose from the broken shuttle wing, curling into a purple sky that did not belong to Earth. Daniel Reyes lay on his back for a moment, staring up at the strange clouds, waiting for the ringing in his ears to stop. His radio was dead. His leg throbbed where a piece of metal had cut him during the crash. He was alone on a planet called Andrisa, and nobody knew exactly where he had gone down. He forced himself up, checked his gear, and started walking. The forest around him was thick with tall, blue-leaf trees, and the air smelled like wet stone. He had 2 days of rations left in his pack, one working knife, and a sidearm with half a magazine. Not much to survive on, but he had trained for worse. By the time the sun began to dip low, Daniel had found no sign of his unit and no beacon signal. He was tired, his leg was stiff, and his stomach growled. He decided to make camp near a ravine, where the rocks would give him some cover from the wind. As he climbed down into the ravine to check for water, he stopped cold. The smell hit him first, blood, old and dried, mixed with something smoky and metallic. Then he saw them, 2 large shapes, scaled and still, lying half-buried under fallen rock. Dragons. Real, alien dragons, dead for what looked like several days. Their scales were a deep gold that had gone dull with death. Daniel's hand went to his sidearm out of instinct, but there was no threat here, only the aftermath of one. He stepped closer, careful not to disturb the bodies, and that was when he heard it. A small, weak sound, almost a whimper. He turned and found her tucked into a crack in the rocks, hidden behind the larger body of what must have been her mother. A baby dragon, no bigger than a large dog, with scales the color of old honey. Her ribs showed through her thin body. Her eyes were half open, glassy and unfocused. She was barely breathing. Daniel crouched down slowly, keeping his movements gentle. The baby dragon's eyes tracked him, but she didn't have the strength to move away. A soft growl came from her throat, more warning than threat, the kind of sound a creature makes when it has nothing left but noise. "Easy," Daniel said quietly, though he doubted she understood English. "I'm not going to hurt you." He looked around the ravine. Whatever had killed her family, raiders, predators, or something else, was long gone. There were scorch marks on the rocks, and deep gashes that didn't look natural. This hadn't been an accident. Someone had done this on purpose. Daniel's mission was simple: survive, find his unit, get home. He was not supposed to get involved with local wildlife, especially not something this fragile. But looking at the little dragon shivering in the dirt, barely clinging to life, he found he couldn't just walk away. He set up his camp right there in the ravine, gathering dry branches for a fire despite knowing it might draw attention. As the flames caught and crackled, casting orange light across the rocks, the baby dragon's eyes followed the movement with something like curiosity, even through her exhaustion. Daniel checked his supplies again. 2 ration packs, a canteen half full of water, a med kit with almost nothing useful left in it. He was already stretching his own survival thin. Taking care of an injured animal, especially one this big and unknown, was not part of the plan. But then she made that sound again, that small, broken whimper, and something in Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen death before, more of it than he wanted to remember, but there was something about a helpless creature trying to survive that always got to him. He moved closer, slow and deliberate, until he was within arm's reach. The baby dragon tensed, her thin body trembling, but she didn't have the strength to bare her teeth or lash out. Daniel held very still and let her look at him, let her decide whether he was a threat or not. After a long moment, her head sank back down onto the dirt. Not trust, not yet, but she had stopped resisting. Daniel took that as a small victory. Night fell fully over Andrisa, and with it came a cold that cut through his jacket. Daniel fed the fire and sat close to the baby dragon, close enough to share the warmth, but far enough not to crowd her. He thought about his unit, about Colonel Whitfield, about the search that was surely underway by now. He thought about the odds of being found before his supplies ran out. Then he looked down at the small, dying creature beside him, and made a decision that would change everything that came after. He reached for his pack. The fire crackled low, throwing orange light against the stone walls of the ravine. Daniel kept his movements slow and careful, aware that one wrong motion could either scare the young dragon further into herself or provoke a defensive strike he would not survive out here alone. He had seen what her mother's claws could probably do. Even in death, the adult dragon's talons looked capable of tearing through steel. He opened his last 2 ration packs and read the label out of habit, though it did not matter. Beef stew, the kind of bland military food nobody actually enjoyed, but everyone was grateful for when they were hungry enough. He warmed 1 pack near the fire, testing the heat with the back of his hand, and then set it down on a flat stone a few feet from where the baby dragon lay watching him. She did not move at first. Her nostrils flared again, testing the air, catching the scent of warm food drifting toward her. Daniel backed away slowly and sat down near the fire, keeping his hands visible and his posture as unthreatening as he could manage. He had no idea if dragonkin understood body language the way humans did, but it felt like the only thing he had to offer besides the food itself. Minutes passed. The small dragon's chest rose and fell in short bursts, and twice she tried to lift her head higher, only to let it drop back down against the stone. Daniel started to think she might be too weak to even reach the food, and he considered moving closer, but stopped himself. Getting too close too fast could be a mistake he would not get to correct. Finally, with what looked like a great effort, she dragged herself forward an inch, then another, her thin legs trembling under her own small weight. It took her nearly 5 minutes to cross the short distance to the ration pack, and by the time she reached it, she was breathing hard, her sides heaving. She lowered her head and began to eat, tentative at first, then faster, as if her body had suddenly remembered what hunger felt like. Daniel watched in silence, something tightening in his chest that he did not examine too closely. He thought about the 2 dead dragons in the ravine, about how many days this small one might have gone without food while guarding bodies that would never move again. He thought about how close he had come to walking past this place entirely. When she finished the first pack, she looked up at him. Her eyes, which had been dull and half-closed before, now held a flicker of something brighter, still wary, but no longer quite so hollow. Daniel opened the second ration pack without hesitation and set it down closer to her this time, close enough that she would not need to strain herself reaching it. He ate nothing that night. He told himself it did not matter, that he could last another day without food, that finding rescue was more urgent than his own hunger. It was not entirely true, but it was reason enough to keep the fire fed and the second meal in her reach instead of his own stomach. As the night grew colder, the baby dragon curled closer to the fire, and by extension, closer to Daniel. She kept a wary distance at first, several feet between them, but as the hours passed and the temperature dropped, that distance shrank without either of them seeming to notice. By midnight, she had settled just beyond arm's reach, her small body curled into a tight ball, wings tucked in, watching him with one eye open even as exhaustion pulled at her. Daniel stayed awake most of the night, feeding the fire, checking his own wound by the dim light, and glancing over at her every few minutes to make sure she was still breathing. Around the time the first moon rose high overhead, casting pale silver light through the canopy above the ravine, he noticed something strange. Her scales, which had looked dull and gray with dust and old blood when he found her, seemed to be regaining some color. Faint threads of gold and copper shimmered faintly along her back where the firelight touched them, as if warmth and food alone were enough to coax life back into her. He did not know much about dragonkin biology, only the basic briefings from before the mission, vague warnings about their strength and unpredictable nature. Nothing about how their bodies healed, or why an animal on the edge of death would suddenly show signs of recovery after a single meal and a little warmth. But he was not about to question it. Near dawn, exhaustion finally caught up with him, and Daniel drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, propped against a rock with his sidearm resting in his lap. He woke sometime later to a strange pressure against his side, warm and steady. Daniel sat very still, unsure whether to move away or stay exactly where he was. In the gray light before sunrise, he studied her more closely. Up close, without the shadow of death hanging over her, she was almost beautiful, delicate scales like layered metal, small horns just beginning to curve back from her skull, and even now, asleep, an alertness in the set of her small body that suggested she was far from ordinary. He thought about moving on, about finding higher ground and getting a signal out before his own supplies ran out completely. But looking down at her sleeping against him, breathing steady and warm, some part of him had already decided that whatever came next, He would not be walking away from this ravine alone. 3 days passed, and the baby dragon grew stronger with each one. By the second morning, she could stand on her own, wobbly but determined. By the third, she was following Daniel around the ravine on unsteady legs, staying close to his side like a shadow that refused to let go. Daniel had started calling her Sky, mostly because of the way her eyes caught the light of the sky when she looked up, a pale gold that shifted with the sun. She seemed to respond to the name, tilting her head whenever he said it, as if trying to understand the sound. With no food left and no sign of rescue, Daniel spent his days searching for anything edible, roots, berries, small game if he could catch it. Sky, weak as she still was, proved surprisingly useful. She would sniff the air and lead him toward patches of plants that turned out to be safe to eat, as though some instinct told her what was good and what was poison. In return, Daniel kept the fire going at night, kept watch while she slept, and made sure nothing else in the forest got close enough to hurt her. It was a strange kind of partnership, built out of necessity, but it worked. On the third night, sitting by the fire, Daniel noticed something odd. Sky had curled up close to him, her tail wrapped loosely around his leg, and she made a series of soft chirping sounds, almost like she was trying to talk. He'd noticed the pattern before. "What are you trying to tell me?" he asked, mostly just to hear his own voice. Sky lifted her head and looked at the ravine wall, where the bodies of her mother and siblings still lay. Her chirping grew softer, sadder. Daniel understood then, without needing words. She was grieving, the same way any creature would grieve a lost family. He moved closer and rested a hand gently on her back. "I'm sorry," he said. "I couldn't save them. But I'm not going anywhere, all right?" Sky pressed her head against his hand, and something passed between them in that moment, something Daniel couldn't quite name. It wasn't just comfort. It felt deeper, like a thread had been tied between them that hadn't existed before. The next day, while exploring a little further from camp to search for water, Daniel found signs that confirmed his suspicions about what had happened to Sky's family. Boot prints in the mud, human-made, along with tracks from some kind of vehicle. Scorch marks on nearby trees matched the ones he'd seen near the bodies. This wasn't some accident or animal attack. Someone had come here with weapons and taken what they wanted, leaving the rest to die. He thought about the scales on the dead dragons, how valuable they might be to the wrong kind of people. Poachers, maybe, or smugglers looking to sell rare materials on the black market. Whoever they were, they had killed a mother and her children and left one small survivor to die alone in the dirt. Daniel felt a familiar anger stir in his chest, the same anger that had gotten him into more than one fight back on Earth, the kind that came from watching the weak get hurt by people who should have known better. He returned to camp to find Sky pacing near the fire, agitated, sniffing the air in the direction he'd gone. When she saw him, she rushed over as fast as her legs could carry her and pressed against him, chirping rapidly. "I'm fine," he said, running a hand along her neck. "I just found some things I needed to see." That evening, Sky did something she hadn't done before. She nudged his hand toward her chest, right over a spot where her scales were a slightly different shade, almost like a birthmark. When Daniel touched it, he felt a faint warmth pulse beneath his fingers, and for just a second, he could have sworn he understood something, a flicker of memory that wasn't his own. Fire. Screaming. Running. He pulled his hand back, startled. Sky watched him carefully, waiting to see if he would pull away completely. He didn't. Instead, he placed his hand back gently, and she relaxed under his touch. Whatever this bond was between them, it was growing into something neither of them fully understood yet. But Daniel knew one thing for certain. Whoever had killed her family and left her to die, if they came back, they would have to go through him first. The sound of engines woke Daniel before dawn. He sat up fast, ears straining in the dark, and heard it again, a low mechanical hum drifting through the trees, growing louder. Sky was already awake beside him, her body tense, a low growl building in her throat. "They're coming back," Daniel whispered, more to himself than to her. He moved quickly, gathering what little gear he had. There was no time to run far, not with Sky still weak and slow on her legs. Instead, he made a choice that his training had drilled into him 100 times. If you can't retreat, prepare the ground. The ravine had natural choke points, narrow paths between rocks that anyone approaching would have to pass through. Daniel used pieces of the crashed shuttle, sharp metal scraps, and loose wiring to rig simple traps along the path. Tripwires that would send debris crashing down, nothing that could kill, but enough to slow down and injure anyone who wasn't careful. Sky watched him work, her eyes sharp despite her exhaustion. When he finished, she nudged a loose rock with her snout, positioning it slightly differently, as if she understood exactly what he was trying to do. Good instincts, Daniel muttered, adjusting the rock further under her guidance. The vehicles arrived just as the sun broke over the horizon. Two rough transports painted in dull, weathered colors, carrying 4 armed men. Daniel recognized the leader immediately from the way the others deferred to him, a broad-shouldered man with a scarred jaw who called himself Voss. He'd heard the name mentioned once in a briefing back on Earth, a known smuggler operating in this sector. Just the whelp, Voss called out to his men as they climbed down from the transports. Command wants the core intact. Don't damage the scales this time. Daniel's stomach turned. They were talking about Sky like she was cargo, not a living creature who had just lost her entire family to these same men. He crouched behind a rock formation, sidearm ready, watching as the raiders approached the ravine entrance. The first man stepped onto the tripwire Daniel had rigged, and a shower of loose rocks and metal debris came crashing down, catching him across the shoulder and knocking him off balance. Ambush! The man shouted, scrambling backward. Daniel used the confusion to his advantage, firing 2 quick shots that forced the raiders to take cover rather than advance. It wasn't enough firepower to win a straight fight, not against 4 armed men, but it didn't need to be. He just needed to buy time and keep them on the defensive. Sky, despite her weakened state, proved far from helpless. As one raider tried to flank around the side of the ravine, she let out a sharp screech and released a small burst of flame from her throat. More heat than fire, but enough to singe the man's jacket and send him stumbling back in surprise. It can already breathe fire, one of the raiders shouted, panic clear in his voice. Daniel corrected loudly, firing another shot that clipped the man's cover. Her name's Sky, and she's not going anywhere with you. The fight dragged on for several tense minutes, Daniel moving between cover points, using the terrain and his rigged traps to keep the raiders scattered and unsure. Sky stayed close to the rocks, using her small size and quick movements to avoid direct hits, occasionally darting out to snap at ankles or release another burst of heat when a raider got too close. Voss, watching his men struggle against a single wounded soldier and a barely grown dragon, finally called the retreat, his voice tight with frustration. Fall back. We'll come back with more firepower. The raiders scrambled to their transports, dragging their injured comrade with them, and sped off in a cloud of dust, leaving the ravine quiet once more. Daniel lowered his weapon, breathing hard, and looked over at Sky. She was standing tall despite her exhaustion, chest heaving, a thin trail of smoke still curling from her nostrils. There was a fierceness in her eyes now that hadn't been there before, something that had grown out of fear and turned into determination. We won this round, Daniel said, kneeling down beside her. But he's right about one thing. They'll be back, and next time, there'll be more of them. Sky pressed her head against his chest, and Daniel understood the message clearly enough. She wasn't going to run, and neither was he. They needed help, more than the 2 of them could provide alone. And Daniel had a feeling he knew exactly where to start looking. After the raiders fled, Sky became restless, pacing near the ravine entrance and looking off toward the distant mountains. She kept nudging Daniel's leg, then walking a few steps in that direction before turning back to check if he was following. You want to show me something, Daniel said, understanding slowly. All right, lead the way. They set off together, Sky moving faster now, her strength returning with each passing hour. The mountains grew closer as the day wore on, and Daniel began to notice things he'd missed before, faint trails worn into the rock, old claw marks on trees, signs that this land had been walked by more than just wild animals. By late afternoon, they reached a hidden valley tucked between 2 peaks, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Daniel stopped at the entrance, stunned. Dozens of dragons filled the valley below, some resting on rock ledges, others gliding low over a shimmering lake, their scales catching the light in shades of copper, gold, and deep amber. Sky let out a series of loud chirps, and heads turned throughout the valley. A large dragon, easily 3 times Sky's size, with scales the color of aged bronze, approached slowly, flanked by 2 others. Daniel recognized the posture immediately, the careful, guarded movement of someone in charge. The elder dragon studied Daniel with sharp, intelligent eyes, then looked down at Sky, who pressed close against Daniel's side, chirping rapidly in what sounded almost like pleading. "My name is Daniel Reyes," he said slowly, raising his empty hands to show he meant no harm. "I found Sky dying near her family. I've been trying to help her since." The elder made a low rumbling sound, clearly skeptical, and several younger dragons behind him shifted aggressively, wings flaring. Daniel felt Sky tense beside him and heard her let out a sharp, defiant chirp toward the others, standing her ground despite her small size. A moment passed in tense silence. Then the elder dragon lowered his head slightly, studying Daniel more closely, as if sensing something beneath the surface. Slowly, he extended his snout and touched it gently to Daniel's chest, right where Sky had touched him days before. Whatever the elder sensed in that touch seemed to shift something in his posture. The aggressive stance of the younger dragons eased slightly, though wariness remained clear in their eyes. "You saved young Skyari," the elder said, his voice deep and rough, forming human words with visible effort. Daniel realized then that dragonkin could learn languages, given enough exposure, and this elder had clearly interacted with humans before, likely not under good circumstances. "I did what anyone should have done," Daniel replied. "But I need your help now. The men who killed her family are coming back, with more weapons and more people. I can't stop them alone." The elder's eyes narrowed. "Your kind has brought only death to us. Why should we trust you, soldier?" Daniel didn't have a clever answer prepared, only the truth. "Because not all of us are the same. I gave up my last meal to keep her alive. I fought 4 armed men with almost nothing to protect her. If that doesn't mean something, I don't know what will." Sky moved forward then, standing between Daniel and the elder, chirping firmly, clearly speaking on his behalf in whatever way dragons communicated complex ideas to each other. The elder watched her for a long moment, something softening in his expression. Before the elder could respond further, a distant hum reached their ears, the unmistakable sound of approaching aircraft. Daniel's heart sank, thinking the raiders had already returned. But as the shapes came into view over the mountain ridge, he recognized the markings immediately. "That's my unit," he said, relief and worry mixing in his voice. Colonel Whitfield must have picked up the shuttle's last known signal. The elder tensed at the sight of more human vehicles approaching, but Daniel held up a hand quickly. "Please, let me speak to them first. I won't let anyone hurt your people." As the transport landed at the valley's edge and Colonel Whitfield stepped out, weapon lowered but eyes wary, Daniel walked forward to meet him, Sky following closely at his side, and the elder dragon watching every move with careful, calculating patience. The next few minutes would decide far more than just Daniel's rescue. They would decide whether humans and dragonkin could ever learn to trust each other at all. Colonel Whitfield lowered his weapon slowly as Daniel approached, his eyes flicking between the young soldier and the dragon walking beside him like an old friend. "Reyes," he said, disbelief clear in his voice. "We thought you were dead out here." "Not dead, sir," Daniel replied. "But we've got a problem bigger than my rescue." He explained everything, the dead dragons, the raiders, Voss and his men hunting for cores and scales, the threat of them returning with heavier weapons. Whitfield listened carefully, his expression hardening with each detail. He had fought smugglers before, back on other frontier worlds, and he knew exactly the kind of damage they could do if left unchecked. The elder dragon stepped forward cautiously, and Whitfield tensed for only a moment before Daniel raised a calming hand. "This is Elder Rasner," Daniel said. Using the name Sky had helped him learn over their conversation. "His people have lost enough already." Rasner studied the colonel carefully. "Your soldier showed kindness where others showed only cruelty. For his sake, we will speak." It took convincing on both sides. Whitfield had to radio command for authorization to work alongside an alien species in active combat, something that had never been done on Andrisa before. Rasner had to convince his own council of elders that trusting humans, even a few, was worth the risk after so much loss. But time was short, and Voss would not wait long to return. By the next morning, an uneasy alliance had formed. Human soldiers, armed with proper weapons and equipment recovered from Whitfield's unit, worked alongside dragonkin warriors who knew the terrain and could strike from the air. Sky, now fully recovered and noticeably stronger, insisted on joining the fight despite her young age, refusing to be left behind. "You don't have to prove anything," Daniel told her as they prepared. Sky simply pressed her head against his side, the same gesture she'd made that first cold night, and Daniel understood. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about protecting what she had left. Voss returned 2 days later, exactly as threatened, with 3 heavily armed transports and a dozen men carrying weapons meant for far more than hunting animals. What he did not expect was the combined force waiting for him. Human soldiers used the ravine's natural choke points, reinforced now with proper defenses, to slow the raiders' advance, while dragonkin warriors struck from above, using speed and fire to disable vehicles before they could get close. Daniel fought alongside Whitfield's unit, coordinating movements with the dragonkin through Sky, who had become an unlikely translator between the two forces. The battle was fierce but short. Outmatched and outmaneuvered, Voss's raiders found themselves surrounded within the hour, their weapons no match for the combined strength of trained soldiers and dragonfire. Voss himself was captured trying to flee in the last working transport, his operation completely dismantled. As the dust settled and the last of the raiders were secured, Daniel found Sky standing atop a rock outcrop, watching the sunrise spread gold light across the valley below. She had grown so much in such a short time, no longer the dying, fragile creature he'd found curled beside her mother's body. He climbed up to sit beside her, both of them tired but unharmed. "We did it," he said quietly. Sky let out a soft, satisfied chirp and leaned into him. The same warmth he'd felt that first night returning now with none of the desperation that had once defined it. In the weeks that followed, Andrisa changed. Word spread of the human soldier who had given his last meal to a dying dragon and stood against armed raiders to protect her. Elder Rasner opened careful talks with human command, laying the groundwork for a real alliance between the two peoples, one built on more solid ground than fear or convenience. Daniel chose to stay on Andrisa, serving as a liaison between humans and dragonkin, a role he'd never expected but one that felt right. Sky stayed close by his side, no longer a helpless hatchling but a growing, capable young dragon who had claimed him as her own the moment he'd shared his last warm meal with her. On quiet evenings, they would sit together near the ravine where they'd first met, watching the twin suns set over Andrisa, a reminder of how far they'd both come from that cold, desperate night when neither of them had expected to survive till morning. What began as one small act of kindness had grown into something far greater, a bond strong enough to bring two worlds together, one warm meal at a time.